The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it interrogated. It drummed a relentless, rhythmic demand against the pavement, washing away the pretenses of the day and leaving everything glistening with a sleek, gray melancholy. It was 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, the dead zone of the corporate soul. It was that specific hour when the caffeine from the morning had soured into a jittery exhaustion, but the release of 5 p.m. was still just far enough away to feel impossible. Mark stood outside the glass doors of his office building, pulling the collar of his trench coat up until it scratched his ears. A damp cold found its way into the seams of his clothes, settling into his bones. At 34, Mark felt like he was piloting a body that was 10 years older. He had lived 3 distinct lifetimes, and the transitions between them had been violent. First, there was the carefree bachelorhood of his 20s, a blur of late nights and ambitious career climbing. Second, the brief, blindingly bright years of his marriage to Sarah, a time that felt like a movie he had watched once and could no longer remember the ending to. And third, the current era, the life of the single dad. He checked his wristwatch. He had exactly 45 minutes before the after-school program at Leo's elementary school closed its gates. 45 minutes to bridge the gap between senior project manager and Leo's dad. 45 minutes to stop pretending he had it all together. He needed caffeine, or maybe just a place to sit where no one asked him for a status update. He ducked into the Daily Grind, a narrow coffee shop tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore. The bell above the door jingled aggressively, cutting through the low hum of indie folk music and the violent hiss of the espresso machine. Mark shook off his umbrella, scattering droplets across the entryway mat, and scanned the room. He wanted the corner seat, the invisible seat, the one where he could stare at the wall and decompress. That's when he saw her, Elena from marketing. The woman was a corporate legend in their building. She walked through the corridors with the posture of a ballerina and the efficiency of a Swiss watch. She was the kind of person who didn't just meet deadlines. She anticipated them 3 weeks in advance. Her spreadsheets were color-coded works of art, her emails were crisp and unassailable, and she had once politely corrected the CEO's grammar during a board meeting without getting fired. She was the terrifyingly perfect standard against which the rest of them were measured. But the woman sitting at the wobbly table near the back window didn't look like a legend. She looked like a ruin. She was staring into a cup of untouched tea, her shoulders hunched forward as if she were trying to protect her chest from a physical blow, and she was weeping. It wasn't the dramatic, heaving sobbing of the movies. It was something far worse. It was a silent, devastating dismantling. Her hand was clamped over her mouth to stifle the sound, while tears tracked black mascara down her cheeks in jagged, inky rivers. She looked small. She looked shattered. Mark froze in the middle of the aisle. The unwritten office code of conduct was ironclad. We do not see each other's humanity. You talk about the weather, the quarterly projections, and the broken printer on the 3rd floor. You do not acknowledge that the woman who runs the national social media campaigns is currently falling apart in the coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. His instinct was to turn around. He should leave. He had 45 minutes of peace, and this scene was the antithesis of peace. This was heavy. This was messy. But then the ghost of a memory stopped him. He thought of the weeks after Sarah's funeral. He remembered standing in the cereal aisle of the grocery store, staring at a box of Cheerios, feeling like he was screaming underwater. He remembered praying that a stranger would just stop, look him in the eye, and acknowledge that the world was ending, so he wouldn't feel so invisible in his grief. Mark sighed, a long exhale that deflated his chest. He walked to the counter. "Large black coffee," he told the barista. He paused, looking back at the woman in the window. "And a chamomile tea with honey. Actually, make the tea extra hot." 2 minutes later, tray in hand, Mark walked over to the back table. He didn't ask if the seat was taken. He just slid into the chair opposite her and set the steaming mug of chamomile down on the scratched wood surface between them. Elena jumped as if a gun had gone off. Her head snapped up and panic flared in her eyes, the terrified, wide-eyed look of a perfectionist caught in a flaw. She scrambled for a napkin, wiping furiously at her face, smearing the mascara further across her cheekbone. "Mark!" she choked out, her voice wet and thick. She tried to straighten her spine, tried to summon the marketing director persona, but it crumbled instantly. I didn't see you. I was just... allergies. The pollen count is... It's really high today. It's November, Elena, Mark said softly. It's been raining for 6 days straight. She froze, the napkin balled tight in her fist. She looked at him, really looked at him, waiting for the judgment, waiting for the awkward excuse to leave. She expected him to make a joke or to pretend he bought the allergy lie. Drink the tea, Mark said, gesturing to the cup. It helps. My son Leo swears it fixes everything. That and dinosaur band-aids, but I'm fresh out of those. A tiny cracked sound escaped her throat, half laugh, half sob. She picked up the cup, her hands trembling so hard the liquid rippled. I'm sorry, she whispered, looking down into the amber liquid. This is unprofessional. Please don't tell anyone at the office. If they see this, I can't have them thinking I'm weak. Weak? Mark leaned back, unbuttoning his damp coat. Elena, I watched you run the Q3 presentation while you had the flu and the fever of 102. You are the most terrifyingly competent person I know. It's all a lie, she blurted out. The dam had broken. The silence of the café seemed to wrap around them, creating a private bubble separate from the rest of the world. I'm up for the director position. Everyone says I'm going to get it. It's the job I've been working toward for 5 years. That's great, Mark said, though he sensed the butt hanging in the air like smoke. It's not, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I don't want it. I hate it. I go home to an empty apartment. I order takeout because I'm too tired to cook. I answer emails until midnight, and I wake up and do it again. I'm 32 years old, Mark, and I have nothing but a really organized Outlook calendar and a premium LinkedIn account. She looked up at him, eyes red and raw. I feel like I'm running a marathon on a treadmill. I'm sprinting as fast as I can, and I'm exhausted, but I'm not going anywhere. If I stop, I'll fly backward and hit the wall. I don't know who I am if I'm not successful, Elena. If I'm not carrying the load, what am I? Mark watched the steam rise from his black coffee. He knew that feeling. He knew the crushing weight of expectation, the terrifying void that opened up when you stopped moving. When Sarah died, Mark started, his voice low and steady. Elena went still. Everyone in the office knew Mark was a widower, but it was treated like radioactive material, something acknowledged but never touched. When she died, he continued, I tried to be super dad. I thought that to make up for Leo not having a mom, I had to be 2 parents in one body. I worked late to secure his financial future. I cooked organic meals from scratch. I read him 3 books every night, and I kept the house spotless. I was running that same marathon you're on. What happened? Elena asked, leaning in slightly. I broke, Mark said simply, about a year in. My brain just short-circuited. I forgot to pick him up from school, just forgot. I was answering emails. By the time I got there, he was the last kid, sitting on the curb with the teacher, kicking rocks. I thought I had ruined his life. I sat in the car and cried, just like you are now. I felt like a failure because I couldn't do it all. What did you do? I apologized to him. And then I stopped. Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The ambient noise of the café faded into the background. I realized something that day. Something that changed how I operate at work and at home. This was the moment. The rain tapped a frantic code against the glass, a rhythmic backdrop to the words that would alter the trajectory of 2 lives. Elena, Mark said, looking her dead in the eye, his voice firm. You are confusing your capacity with your obligation, Elena blinked, the tears stopping as her brain tried to parse the sentence. What? Just because you can carry it all doesn't mean you should, Mark said. You have this massive capacity. You're smart, you're strong, you're incredible at what you do. So the world keeps handing you bricks. They pile them into your arms because they know you won't drop them. And you keep taking them because you know you can lift them. He took a sip of his coffee, letting the bitterness ground him. But you never asked if you were going to the same place the bricks were being built for. You think your value comes from how much weight you can carry without buckling. That isn't value, Elena. That's just labor. Elena sat back, the breath leaving her lungs in a rush. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Capacity versus obligation, she whispered, testing the weight of the words. You don't have to earn your right to exist by being useful, Mark said, his voice softer now. You're allowed to just be. You're allowed to be the director, or you're allowed to quit and open a bakery, or you're allowed to just do your job and go home at 5 p.m. and stare at the wall. But if you keep carrying bricks just because you have a strong back, you're going to break. And unlike a building, people don't have blueprints for how to put themselves back together. Elena stared at him. For a long time, the only sound was the clinking of ceramic mugs in the background. She looked at this man she had previously thought of as just the guy who approved the budget sheets and had pictures of a kid on his desk. She saw the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the gray hairs at his temples, but also a deep, anchored peace she had never noticed before. I don't know how to put the backpack down, she admitted, her voice trembling again. I'm scared that if I put it down, I'll just float away. You start by taking out one brick, Mark said gently. Just one. What's the heaviest one right now? The one that hurts the most? The promotion, she said immediately, the answer firing out before she could second-guess it. I don't want the director job. I want to move to the creative team. Less money, less prestige, but I get to actually write again. I miss writing. But I felt like I'd be letting everyone down. The VP, the team, myself. Let them down, Mark smiled, and it was the first time she had seen a genuine smile in that cafe. They'll survive. The company will hire someone else, the stock market won't notice. The question is, will you survive if you take the job? She shook her head slowly. The tension in her shoulders began to drop, inch by inch. No, I don't think I will. Mark checked his watch. 4:55 p.m., the piece was over. The dash to the school was about to begin. I have to go, Mark said, standing up and buttoning his coat. Leo gets anxious if I'm not there when the big hand hits the 12. He thinks I've been abducted by aliens. Mark? He paused, his hand on the handle of his umbrella. Thank you, she said. She didn't smile. It was too soon for that, but the frantic, hunted panic in her eyes was gone. It was replaced by a thoughtful, quiet resolve. See you tomorrow, Elena, Mark said, pushing the door open and letting the damp Seattle air rush in. Leave the bricks here. They don't belong to you. The Monday after the incident in the café, the office air conditioning hummed with its usual predatory quiet. It was a sound Mark knew well, the white noise of ambition, of unspoken anxieties, of people typing furiously to prove they existed. He sat in his cubicle, staring at a Gantt chart that refused to align, but his ears were tuned to the hallway. He was waiting for the fallout. At 9:15 a.m., he saw Elena walk toward the VP's office. Usually, Elena walked like she was on a runway, shoulders back, chin high, a stack of files held like a shield against her chest. Today she walked differently. She wore flats, not heels. Her stride was slower, less percussive. She wasn't holding any files. Her hands were empty. Mark watched through the gap in his blinds as she disappeared into the glass-walled office of Marcus Henderson, a man who believed work-life balance was a term made up by people who did want Ferraris. Mark couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see the theater of it. He saw Henderson stand up, gesturing expansively with a Mont-Blanc pen. He saw the look of incredulity on the older man's face, the eyebrows shooting up, the mouth hanging open. He saw Henderson point to the organizational chart on the whiteboard, likely outlining the glorious, ulcer-inducing future he had planned for her. And then Mark saw Elena. She didn't shrink. She didn't cry. She simply shook her head. She said something brief, placed her hands on the back of the guest chair, grounding herself, and smiled. It wasn't a polite, corporate smile. It was a small, private smile. The smile of someone who had put down a backpack filled with bricks. She walked out 5 minutes later. As she passed Mark's cubicle, she didn't stop, but she caught his eye through the glass. She gave a microscopic nod. Done. The gossip hit the floor before lunch. Elena turned down the director role. Elena is stepping down to senior associate. Is she sick? Is she pregnant? Is she being investigated by the SEC? The corporate organism couldn't understand it. In this ecosystem, you either grew or you died. To voluntarily shrink, to say this is enough, it was heresy. But the sky didn't fall. The stock price didn't crash. The world kept spinning, indifferent to the structural changes of the marketing department. 6 months later, the shift wasn't an explosion, it was an erosion. It happened in increments, like the slow wearing down of a sharp stone into something smooth and river-washed. Mark noticed it first in the wardrobe. The severe black suits were replaced by soft cardigans and patterned blouses. The hair, usually lacquered into a helmet of perfection, was sometimes pulled back in a loose, messy bun. But mostly he noticed it in the time. At 5 p.m., the elevator dinged. Mark was packing up his bag, a ritual he used to perform with a sense of guilt, looking over his shoulder to see who was still typing. Now he just packed. He walked out into the hallway and nearly collided with Elena. "Leaving?" he asked. "Leaving," she confirmed. She was carrying a tote bag that looked suspiciously like it contained gym clothes or perhaps something messier. They fell into step together, walking toward the lobby. This had become their rhythm. Two veterans of the burnout wars, escaping the trenches together. "How was the budget meeting?" Mark asked. "Gary tried to schedule a follow-up for 6:30 p.m., Elena said, pressing the elevator button. "I told him I had a hard stop." "Did you?" "I do now," she grinned. "Pottery class," Mark laughed. "Still? I thought you said you were terrible at it." "Oh, I'm abysmal," Elena said cheerfully. "Last week I tried to make a fruit bowl. It collapsed in the kiln. Now it's a very avant-garde coaster, but that's the point, isn't it?" "Practicing being useless," Mark quoted her own words back to her. "Exactly. I spend 2 hours covered in clay, making things that serve no economic function, and nobody grades me on them." "It's glorious." The elevator doors opened, spilling them out into the lobby. Outside, the Seattle spring was doing its best impression of winter, a wet, blustery evening that turned the streetlights into blurry halos. "What about you?" Elena asked, buttoning her coat. "Heading to the zone?" The zone was their code for Mark's evening routine, the chaotic, high-stakes world of single parenting. "To ball," Mark groaned, rubbing his temples. "First game of the season. The mighty Mudbugs versus the Screaming Eagles. It's going to be a massacre." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Is Leo excited?" "Leo is excited about the snacks," Mark corrected. "He has no interest in the actual mechanics of baseball. He thinks the goal is to find the most interesting bug in the outfield. Last year, he sat down on second base and refused to move because he was hatching an egg, which turned out to be a rock." Elena laughed, a genuine, full-throated sound that turned a few heads in the lobby. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have laughed like that in the building. She would have issued a polite, closed-mouth chuckle. "He sounds creative," she said. "He's a disaster," Mark said affectionately. "And I'm the assistant coach, which means I have to herd 12 6-year-olds who are all on a sugar high. I'm terrified." They reached the glass doors. The rain was coming down in sheets now. Mark popped his umbrella open. Elena hesitated. She didn't have her car today. It was in the shop. She was looking at the bus stop across the street, where a grim line of commuters stood huddled under a leaky shelter. Mark looked at her, then at the bus stop, then back at her. "Hey," he said. "Yeah? Do you want to come?" Elena blinked. To ball?" Mark felt a sudden flush of heat on his neck. He hadn't planned to ask. His life with Leo was a sealed ecosystem. He rarely invited people in, mostly because he didn't have the energy to host, to explain, to perform. But standing here with Elena, the idea didn't feel exhausting. It felt helpful. "I mean, if you want," Mark stammered slightly. "It's in Queen Anne. I can drop you off at your place afterward." "You'd save 40 minutes on the bus. And, frankly, I could use the moral support. If Leo decides to hatch another rock, I need a witness." Elena looked at him. She looked at the rain. Then she looked at her watch. "Capacity check?" she asked quietly. Mark smiled. "No obligation. Only if you have the bandwidth." "I have the bandwidth," she decided. "I'll skip pottery. The clay will be there next week. The mighty Mudbugs might not survive that long." "Get in the car," Mark said. "You're going to regret this." The baseball field was a study in chaos theory. It was a muddy patch of grass behind the community center, surrounded by chain-link fences and parents clutching thermoses of coffee like life preservers. The air smelled of wet earth, cut grass, and the distinct, sugary scent of bubblegum. Mark parked his SUV and turned to Elena. "Okay, ground rules. Do not expect athleticism. Do not expect strategy. Expect crying and expect at least one child to run toward the wrong base. Got it, Elena said. She looked nervous. Does Leo know about me? He knows I have a friend named Elena who likes the tea he recommended, Mark said. That's about it. They got out of the car. Mark went into dad mode, instantly grabbing the equipment bag, the cooler of orange slices, and the bag of bats. Elena walked beside him, her tote bag over her shoulder, looking oddly out of place in her office casual wear amidst the sea of sweatpants and rain slickers. Dad! A small projectile launched itself at Mark's legs. Leo, he was wearing a uniform that was 2 sizes too big, his hat pulled down so low it covered his eyebrows. His face was smeared with something purple, likely grape juice. Hey, buddy, Mark said, dropping the bag to ruffle the boy's hair. Ready to crush it? I found a worm. Leo announced, holding up a wriggling, mud-covered earthworm. That's... Great, Leo, put the worm down. We have a game. Mark gently steered the worm away from the uniform. Then he turned Leo toward Elena. Leo, this is my friend Elena, remember? The lady who drank the tea? Leo squinted up at her, wiping his muddy hands on his pristine white baseball pants. The crying lady? Mark froze. He hadn't realized Leo had absorbed that detail from the story. Elena didn't flinch. She crouched down, ignoring the mud that threatened her shoes, so she was eye level with him. That's me, she said seriously. I was crying because I didn't have any tea, but your dad fixed it. He said you're the expert on tea. Leo nodded solemnly. Chamomile is for sad. Peppermint is for tummy aches. Green tea is for when you want to stay up late, but Dad says no. I see, Elena said. I'll remember that. Are you going to play baseball now? Yes, Leo said. But I'm mostly here for the snacks. We get Rice Krispie treats if we don't cry. That seems like a fair deal, Elena agreed. All right, mudbugs, let's go. The head coach, a man named Steve who took the ball far too seriously, blew a whistle. Leo sprinted off in the wrong direction initially before correcting course toward the dugout. Mark looked at Elena, the crying lady. He winced. Kids are honest, she shrugged, standing up. I like him. He has priorities. Go find a spot on the bleachers, Mark said, handing her a spare umbrella from the trunk. I have to go prevent them from eating the chalk. Elena took the umbrella. Go, Coach Mark. The game was, as predicted, a disaster. It was less a sporting event and more a herding exercise. The ball would be hit, off a tee, and every single player from both teams would converge on it in a chaotic scrum, shouting, I got it, I got it, regardless of whose team was at bat. Mark spent the first 3 innings jogging between first and second base, gently redirecting children who were wandering into the outfield to look at airplanes. But every time he looked over at the bleachers, he saw her. Elena was sitting in the 3rd row, huddled under the umbrella. She wasn't checking her phone. She wasn't looking bored. She was watching. In the bottom of the 4th inning, the final inning, by mercy rule, Leo came up to bat. The score was 42-42. They stopped keeping score, but the kids knew. Leo tapped the bat on the plate. He adjusted his helmet. He looked very serious. He swung, thwack. It was a solid hit. The ball rolled past the pitcher's mound, trundling through the wet grass. Run, Leo, run! Mark shouted, pointing to first base. Leo dropped the bat. He looked at the ball, he looked at first base, and then he took off running, but not to first base. He ran directly toward the pitcher's mound to pick up the ball. No, Leo, don't touch it! Run to the bag, Mark yelled, waving his arms. The opposing team was also converging on the ball. Leo got there first. He picked up the wet, muddy ball, looked around in panic, and didn't know what to do. The other kids were closing in. And then, from the bleachers, a voice cut through the rain. Run to the dad, Leo. Run to the dad? It was Elena. She was standing up, waving her umbrella. Leo looked at her. He looked at Mark, who was standing near first base. The instruction made sense to him. Run to the dad. Leo clutched the ball to his chest and sprinted toward Mark. He bypassed first base entirely, ran straight into Mark's legs, and hugged him. I got the ball, Dad, Leo beamed. The opposing team stopped. The coaches stopped. Technically, Leo was out. Technically, he had committed several infractions. But Mark looked down at his son, who was covered in mud, holding the ball like a trophy. Then he looked at the bleachers. Elena was clapping. She was clapping and cheering as if Leo had just hit a grand slam in the World Series. "Safe!" Mark shouted, throwing his hands up. Coach Steve looked like he was going to argue, saw the look on Mark's face, and sighed. "Safe," Steve echoed weakly. The postgame an hour later, they were at Luigi's Pizza, a noisy, neon-lit parlor that smelled of pepperoni and yeast. The windows were steamed up from the rain outside. Leo was in the play area, burying himself in a plastic ball pit. Mark and Elena sat in a booth, a half-eaten pepperoni pizza between them. Mark wiped grease from his hands with a paper napkin. He felt tired, but it was a good tired. The kind of tired that came from actually living, not just surviving. "I'm sorry about the screaming," Elena said, taking a sip of her soda. "I got a little carried away. Run to the dad isn't official terminology, is it?" "It should be," Mark laughed. "It worked." It was the only time he ran in the right direction all day. He looked at her. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity. There was a smear of mud on her coat where Leo had high-fived her. She looked relaxed in a way he had never seen her at the office. The armor was gone. "You were good with him," Mark said quietly. "He's usually shy with new people." "He's a cool kid," Elena said. She traced the rim of her glass. "He reminds me of you. He observes everything. Is that what I do?" "Yes," she said. "You saw me that day in the café. Nobody else saw me. Everyone else walked by the breakdown. You stopped." "I've been the breakdown," Mark said. "Takes one to know one." "Mark," she hesitated. "Thank you for inviting me. I didn't realize how much I missed this." "Missed a ball?" "Missed noise," she said, gesturing to the screaming kids in the ball pit. "Mess life. My apartment is so quiet. My life has been so curated. Everything is in its place, but nothing happens." "The capacity trap," Mark murmured. "Yeah, I had so much capacity for work, I squeezed out the capacity for anything else." She looked at him. "You know, when you told me to put down the bricks, I thought that meant I would just be empty-handed. I didn't realize that if I put down the bricks, I'd have hands free to catch a baseball. Or eat pizza." Mark felt a shifting in his chest. It was the movement of a wall he had built 3 years ago. A wall that said no vacancy. He looked at Leo, who was currently trying to climb up the slide, and then back at Elena. "You fit," Mark said. "It just came out." "What?" "Here in the mess. You fit?" Elena held his gaze. The fluorescent lights of the pizza parlor reflected in her dark eyes. "I'd like to fit," she whispered. "I'd like to keep fitting." "Leo has a game next Tuesday," Mark said. "We're playing the Purple Cobras. They're vicious." "I'll be there," Elena smiled. "I'll bring gum." "Dad?" Leo came running up to the table, sweating and breathless. "I need quarters. The claw machine has a stuffed sloth." Mark reached into his pocket, but Elena beat him to it. She pulled 2 quarters out of her purse and handed them to Leo. "Get the sloth, Leo," she said seriously. "You're the best, Elena." Leo shouted, grabbing the coins and sprinting away. Mark watched him go, then looked back at Elena. "You know," Mark said, "buying his affection with quarters is a slippery slope." "I have capacity," she grinned. "Just because you can," Mark started. Doesn't mean I shouldn't," she finished. "Sometimes the obligation is just to have fun, Mark." Mark leaned back in the booth. The noise of the arcade, the rain drumming on the glass, the smell of pizza, it all felt like a symphony. "Yeah," Mark said, picking up a slice. "I think you're right." The rain in Seattle was constant, a gray curtain that had hung over the city for a week, but the house on Maple Street held its own atmosphere. It was a climate controlled not by the weather, but by the chaotic, messy warmth of 3 people trying to build something durable. 3 years had passed since the afternoon in the café. 3 years since Mark had told Elena to put down the bricks. The house was different now. When Mark had lived here alone with Leo, it had been a museum of good parenting. Surfaces were wiped clean, toys were binned in color-coded crates, and silence was preserved like a fragile antique. Now, the living room was a testament to the collision of lives. There were Lego towers architecturally unsound, looming skyscrapers of mismatched plastic bricks dominating the rug. There was a drying rack in the corner draped with damp raincoats and a muddy dog leash. They had Acquired a golden retriever named Barnaby because Leo insisted the house was too quiet. And on the mantelpiece, where Mark used to keep a solitary clock, there was now a lopsided, hand-thrown clay vase. It was one of Elena's creations. It leaned dangerously to the left, but it held a bouquet of bright, defiant sunflowers. It was November 14th. Mark stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a rhythmic, intense precision. Chop, chop. The knife hit the cutting board with unnecessary force. He knew what today was. His body knew it before he even looked at the calendar. It was the 5th anniversary of Sarah's death. For the first 2 years, this day had been a black hole. He would take the day off work, send Leo to his grandparents, and sit in the dark, drinking scotch and staring at old photo albums, feeling the weight of the loss crush his chest. But this year was different. This year, Elena was here. He heard the front door open, followed by the wet shake of an umbrella and the thumping of a backpack hitting the floor. "We're home!" Elena's voice called out, breathless and bright. "And we are soaked." Barnaby refused to pee because the grass was too wet, according to his facial expression. "It's a valid complaint," Leo's voice chimed in. At 9 years old, Leo was lanky, sharp-witted, and currently obsessed with Minecraft and sarcasm. Mark wiped his hands on a towel and forced a smile onto his face. He turned as they entered the kitchen. Elena looked lived in. Her hair, once the subject of intense corporate scrutiny, was frizzy and escaping its clip. She was wearing a yellow raincoat that clashed with her work trousers. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. She paused when she saw him. She saw the pile of chopped vegetables enough for an army. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders were pulled up toward his ears. She knew what day it was, too. "Hey," she said softly, walking over to him. She didn't kiss him immediately. She just rested a cold hand on his arm. "That is a lot of carrots, Mark." "Soup?" Mark said, his voice tight. "Making soup. Comfort food. Comfort food implies comfort," she noted. "You look like you're preparing for a siege." Mark let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Just keeping busy, you know." "I know," she said. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder for a brief second. "Go sit down. I'll finish the demolition of these vegetables. I'm fine, Elena. I have capacity." She pulled back, raising an eyebrow. It was their phrase a weaponized inside joke? You have capacity? Or you have a stubborn obligation to suffer alone? Mark cracked a small, genuine smile. "Low blow. Go." She pointed to the living room. "Leo needs help with his math homework. He says fractions are a conspiracy invented by the government." Mark surrendered the knife. He might be right. Mark walked into the living room. The TV was off. The rain drummed against the window pane. He sat on the sofa, feeling the physical exhaustion of the mental load he had been carrying all day. The anniversary was a brick, a massive granite brick. For years, Mark had carried it alone because he felt he had to. It was his grief. Sarah was his wife. Leo was their son. He had convinced himself that bringing Elena into this part of his life, the dark, heavy part, would break the foundation of their relationship. He thought she was here for the light, for the second chance, not for the ghosts of the first one. "Dad?" Mark looked up. Leo was lying on his stomach on the rug, a workbook spread out in front of him. Barnaby the dog was using Leo's ankles as a pillow. "Yeah, bud. If I have 3/4 of a pizza, and I eat 1/8 of it, how much pizza do I have left?" Leo asked, clicking his pen. "Ideally, you have a stomachache," Mark said. Leo rolled his eyes. "Dad, serious math. 5/8, Mark said automatically. "But you should really just eat the whole pizza," Leo scribbled the answer. He didn't look up as he asked the next question. "Are we going to visit Mom's garden tomorrow?" The question hung in the air. Mom's garden was a small plot in the cemetery where they had planted hydrangeas. "Yeah," Mark said, his throat tight. "Yeah, we are, unless you don't want to." Leo stopped writing. He chewed on the end of his pen. "I want to, but—" "Is Elena coming?" Mark froze. He hadn't asked her. He hadn't explicitly excluded her, but he hadn't invited her. He had assumed she would want to step back to give them space. He assumed she wouldn't want to intrude on the memory of the woman who came before her. "Do you want her to come?" Mark asked gently. Leo shrugged, a gesture that was too casual to be real. "She knows a lot about flowers." And she holds the umbrella better than you. You always drip water on my neck, Mark smiled, but his heart ached. I'll ask her. Later that evening, the soup was eaten, the fractions were conquered, and the house had settled into a quiet hum. Leo was asleep upstairs. Mark was in the living room, staring at the fire he had lit. The warmth battled the chill coming off the windows. Elena walked in, carrying 2 mugs of tea, chamomile, the same tea he had bought her 3 years ago. It had become their ritual. She sat down next to him, tucking her legs up under her. She handed him a mug. You were quiet at dinner, she said. Sorry, Mark murmured, just the day, Mark, she said, turning to face him. I know you think you need to protect me from this. I know you think that your grief for Sarah is a room I am not allowed to enter because it might make me jealous or uncomfortable or sad. Mark looked at her. It's not that. It's heavy, Elena. It's a lot of baggage. You signed up for the new Mark, the guy who learned to put the bricks down, but today I'm the old Mark, the sad widower. Elena set her tea on the coffee table. She reached out and took his hands. Her palms were warm. You're forgetting the lesson, she whispered. Capacity versus obligation? No, she shook her head. The other lesson. The one you taught me without saying it. The lesson that we don't build alone, she squeezed his hands. I'm not Sarah. I never will be. I'm not trying to replace her. But I am the person who loves you now. And that means I love all of you, including the part of you that misses her, including the grief. That's not a brick you have to carry in a separate backpack. Mark, we can put it in the trunk of the car and drive it together. Mark looked at the fire, the orange light dancing in his eyes. Leo asked if you were coming to the cemetery tomorrow. And what did you say? I said I'd ask you. He wants you there. He says you hold the umbrella better? Elena laughed, a soft, wet sound. Tears were shining in her eyes. He's right. You're terrible with umbrellas. You have no spatial awareness. I'd like you to come, Mark said, his voice cracking. I don't want to do it alone this time. I don't have the capacity to do it alone. Then don't, she said firmly. I'll be there. I'll hold the umbrella. You hold the flowers. Mark pulled her into him. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the lingering smell of the rain. He felt the tension that had been coiled in his spine all day finally snap and dissolve. He realized then that he had been wrong about his heart. He thought his heart was a house fully renovated, with no rooms left to add. He thought he had a Sarah room and an Elena room and they had to be kept on separate floors. But Elena had taught him that love wasn't about architecture, it was about flow. The walls were movable. The grief could exist in the same room as the joy. The memory of the past could sit on the mantelpiece right next to the lopsided vase of the future. The next day, the living room scene, they went to the cemetery. It rained, of course. It was Seattle, but Elena held the umbrella high and wide, covering all 3 of them. They stood there for a long time. Leo talked about Minecraft. Mark talked about how much Sarah would have hated the current political climate. Elena didn't say much. She just stood there, a solid, warm presence at Mark's side, her hand resting lightly on Leo's shoulder. When they got home, the emotional release was palpable. The heavy thing had been done. The ritual was complete. Now it was 5 p.m. on a Saturday. The living room was a disaster zone, and it was perfect. Mark sat on the sofa, a book resting on his chest, watching the scene before him. Leo was explaining the complex politics of a new video game to Elena. Elena was listening with rapt attention, nodding seriously while simultaneously trying to braid the hair of a stuffed Chewbacca doll. Leo had insisted Chewie needed a makeover. So, the creeper blows up, Leo explained, gesturing wildly. But if you have obsidian, you're safe. Do we have obsidian, Elena? I don't think we have obsidian, Elena replied, struggling with a knot in the Wookiee's fur. We have chamomile tea and a very stubborn dog. Will that work? No, Leo sighed. We're doomed. Elena looked up and caught Mark watching them. Her hair was messy, frizzing out in the humidity. She had a smudge of dirt on her cheek from the cemetery. She looked tired. The emotional weight of the morning had been real, but she looked happy. What? She mouthed across the room. Mark shook his head, smiling. That day in the café 3 years ago, he had told her that she was confusing capacity with obligation. He had saved her from a life of hollow success, from a life where she was defined by her output. But looking at her now, braiding a Wookiee while discussing defensive strategies against pixelated monsters, he realized the full circle of that moment. She had saved him too. She had taught him that he didn't have to be the martyr. He didn't have to be the strong, silent widower who carried the world on his back. He allowed himself to be weak, allowed himself to share the load, and in doing so, he had found a strength he never knew he had. "Dad, Elena says we can order pizza," Leo shouted, breaking Mark's reverie. "Only if it has pineapple," Mark countered, the old joke falling comfortably from his lips. "Gross!" Leo screamed, as was tradition. "That's a crime against food." Elena laughed, that sound that had become the soundtrack of Mark's second life. It was deep, resonant, and entirely unconcerned with being professional. She walked over to the sofa and sat down next to him, leaning her head on his shoulder. Mark wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. The heat of the fire, the sound of the rain, the boy yelling at the dog, it all washed over him. "Heavy morning," Mark said quietly, kissing the top of her head. "Yeah," she murmured. "But we carried it. Work is going to be crazy on Monday," Mark noted. "Q4 projections. Let it be crazy," she said, closing her eyes. "The printer will break. The client will complain. I might spill coffee on my shirt. Sounds like a disaster." "It will be," she agreed. She looked at the Legos, at the rain against the window, and at the boy who was now trying to teach the dog how to sit. She squeezed Mark's hand. "But I'm leaving it all at the door." "Good," Mark said. "I'm just here now," she whispered. "Nowhere else I have to be, no bricks to carry." Mark tightened his hold on her. The rain kept falling outside, a relentless gray interrogation of the world. But inside, they were dry. They were safe. "Me too," Mark said, resting his cheek against her hair. "Me too. The conclusion: the world will always ask for more than you can give. It will praise you for your endurance until you collapse under the weight of it. It will demand that you carry the grief, the work, the expectations, and the perfectionism until your back breaks." The moment Mark spoke those words in the Café capacity versus obligation, he broke the spell for both of them. Elena learned that she didn't have to burn herself out to be worthy of existence. She learned that a lopsided clay vase with sunflowers was worth more than a perfect Q3 report. Mark learned that letting someone see his cracks didn't make him a bad father or a weak man. It made him a human one. He learned that the heart is not a limited capacity room, but an expanding universe. They built a life not based on how much they could withstand, but on how much they could share. They stopped carrying bricks that didn't belong to them and started building a home with the ones that did. And that changed everything.